are talking about shame. Shame, shame, shame. Daga, you're an expert therapist. What is shame and how do we deal with it?
Well, thanks, Bett. I am really happy that we are bringing up this subject. I think shame is one of the issues, the topics that I see in my practice most often, and it's also quite alive for me. And I think one of the best definitions of shame, or the ones that really resonate with me, is the definition of Brené Brown, who's been doing studies on and research on shame. So Brené says, shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Something we've experienced, done, or failed to do makes us unworthy of connection. And according to Brené Brown, shame is not helpful or productive at all. So shame is that feeling that differs it from guilt, that we experience it as being unworthy, like something is wrong with us. We are just broken, we are flawed. While when we experience guilt, we feel that something that we did was not okay, something that we did was wrong. And shame, it's provoked socially, let's say. Like shame in itself without a social context probably wouldn't exist, because we start to believe that there is something wrong about us because we did something which is not seen well, or it's there's a threat that the connection is going to be broken because of what we did, and it makes us believe that we inherently are wrong.
Wow. So I'm wondering, what are the effects of shame? What can it cause us to do or feel or behavior changes that are not helpful? Like, what do you see in your clients?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question, and it's not easy to answer, even though the roots of shame can be pointed towards, but usually it's not very easy to just find that one factor. So shame stems from early childhood experiences, or teenage experiences. So usually it's related to those times even in our life when we build our self-image, and we are quite vulnerable to that, and the story that we create about ourselves, who we are and what we are, it's well, it relies on the feedback that we get from our environment. So the early experiences, they might be traumatic experiences related to either bullying or some bigger trauma events. It can be emotional neglect. So emotional neglect is different to physical neglect in a way that sometimes it's very difficult to even talk about it or even notice that. It's related to not giving enough emotional support and recognition to a person. And another reason, or another situation or context that makes us prone to feel shame are some disorders, some mental psychological disorders, which are linked with excessive self-criticism and excessive self-judgment. So basically, since shame is that belief that we take from the environment, we have some feedback that there is something wrong about what we've done, and we start to believe, and we start to include it in our image of ourselves, like, I am wrong, this happened, therefore I am wrong, I am bad, I am unworthy, I am very critical, I am not worthy of just even being here. This means that it's also quite a challenge to challenge shame and to challenge those beliefs, which doesn't mean that it's not possible. It's absolutely possible to work with shame.
So I did some research on where does shame come into our body? Like where do we feel it? So
Mm.
before I show this graphic, I want to talk about something I do at the beginning of almost every yoga class I teach is I have people feel their feelings. And this is something that should, when we hear, oh, you should feel your feelings, I think the should word is interesting. We should be able to feel our feelings. But when we start to try to feel our feelings, as I find it myself and in my students, they actually have a really hard time finding out how they feel and where in their body. And that's why I think somatic therapists are very valuable to help us find our emotions.
Mm.
Now, this was a research that I'm about to show that happened in two different studies. I think it was 700 different people. And they basically gave them a drawing and said, for this emotion, where do you feel activation in your body? And then they had another one, and where do you feel less activation in your body? So they've colored in both sides, and then they did a bunch of statistical analysis on this. So this is, I think it's one of the first studies that really shows where emotion is in our body. And this is where we see shame. So we'll give people a moment if you're watching this, and we'll put it in the show notes if you're just listening. But it's fascinating that it's around the face. You can see it's very closely to the eyes. Eyes are feeling shame. So I recommend if someone, maybe they don't even know they're feeling shame, just take some time to sit, let yourself calm down, listen, do some listening exercise, breathing, feeling the ground, and then come into your emotional state and notice, do you feel a lot of heat around your eyes? This activation could show that maybe it's a shame response that the person is feeling. Now, I'm a yoga teacher, so I'm helping people get into their body, their gross body and their subtle mind, which I think the subtle mind is probably mislabeled because emotions, I would assume, is part of the subtle mind. But Daga, what do we do once we've identified, wow, I am feeling shame? Is there
Mm.
something we can do? Do we need to accept it? Do we need to try to do some kind of affirmation? What's the next thing to do once we've realized this?
Mhm. Um, First of all, thank you, Beth, for this, for sharing this. It's really interesting, and I'm very happy that you brought up this physical aspect, the biological aspect, because the physiology of shame is really, really interesting. And I think what you observed as well, the energy around on our face and around our eyes, I would also add to that around our cheeks, because what we experience when we are ashamed usually is also blushing, like this rush of heat to our face, right? And another physiological reaction that we might experience when we feel shame is like a sunken feeling, like we want to disappear. Like we basically we don't want to exist. There's something, because there is something so wrong about us that we shouldn't even exist, right? And it does manifest in our body. So what is interesting, when we know that, we know that these reactions are related to the activation of our sympathetic nervous system. Sometimes it might also be accompanied, or there might also be the sensation of queasiness, like there is this, yeah, all the symptoms which are related to sympathetic activation, which means that we don't feel safe. So the first step that we do is to make sure that we create for ourselves internal safety. So if we want to work on our shame, we want to be sure that whoever we want to work with, it's going to be a safe person and we're going to be feeling safe with them. That's the prerequisite number one, so that it's even possible for us to be vulnerable enough to share our shameful story. So I would say let's do that. Let's work with somebody who's also aware of the physiological symptom and what it means to help somebody assist a person to bring them back into the parasympathetic from the sympathetic. No, so the let's say the dance between those two, and relating a shameful story might constantly be evoking that sympathetic reaction in sympathetic state. It's going to be eased. It will be, we will be held in a very safe way and contained in that. um, and then we work on identifying the story and seeing the story as it is, and let's say finding a way to externalize the shame from our identity as this is who I am to just a story or an event or the story or that belief coming from the outside. So let's say we were bullied at school because that is either part of many of us lives, or we've observed that we've witnessed bullying. When somebody is bullied, they might start believing that what the bully does or says is true, even if it isn't. They start to believe in that story, that this is who they are. So to identify that and start to comprehend also on a body level in a safe environment that this is not who we are organically. This is just like what happened to us and what we unconsciously or subconsciously started to believe in is like step, let's say, number 2. And then anything else, it just depends on our individual story and on the person that we're working with.
All right. Well, that's very helpful, Daga. I really appreciate that going through that. So I think, is that everything we want to cover today?
I think it's a good overview of what shame is. And just one thing to add, let's not be ashamed of shame. It can be really debilitating if we allow it to just show up in our life on a regular basis. So I would encourage anybody who feels ashamed of any part of them to reach out for help and assistance. And I'm sure you can find good and safe people out there.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks, Daga. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please like, subscribe, share with a friend, and put a comment in the bottom of the comment section on what another topic you would love to hear about. So have a wonderful day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.